Today, of course, the 11th day of the 11th month, Veterans Day, honoring our veterans, both living and deceased. Now, to mark the day, the Knights of Columbus in New Haven is paying tribute to our vets with a very special exhibit called The Art of War, featuring World War I vintage posters. Here to tell us more is the Knights' Peter Sonsky. Thanks for coming in. Now, before we look at these some of these posters and images and graphics of them, first of all, how did the Knights of Columbus in New Haven get involved with this?
Well, the Knights of Columbus, from the incursion of the United States into a war along the Mexican border in 1916, had seen a need to assist our soldiers in their creature comforts and just their overall morale. So just spontaneously, Knights of Columbus who were along that area had begun to develop little centers where they could come. They would get paper to write, cards to play, and just a time to pass their free time. And it evolved as the United States declared war and entered into World War I. So we had centers throughout the United States in areas of training and readying for deployment, as well as overseas in France.
So the Knights really are, for a long time, has had a history of affiliation and helping out in those matters.
That's right, Jeff.
Interesting. Now, also, let's take a look at some of these posters. The one we've been seeing, the actual Art of War poster that we showed a moment ago, and here it is back on the screen. Now, tell us about this one, please.
This is an exhibition. Now, again, remember, this is 1917, 1918, 95 years ago.
Yeah.
The manner of communication was propaganda through written word or spoken word or posting. Yeah, we didn't have television, we didn't have smartphones and tablets and that sort of thing. So this was the way in which people were encouraged to support the war effort. So there's a collection of posters that the Knights of Columbus has assembled to show how the war effort was supported during World War I.
And they are really interesting. I still remember, of course, we were talking during the break about Rosie the Riveter, which I think was World War II, but that's very iconic, and some of these you might even remember. It's sort of like, almost like a Saturday Evening Post kind of a feel when you think about these very iconic images. We also saw some others. There's one that, let's see, this one, can you tell it? Well, this one actually mentions the Knights of Columbus itself, doesn't it?
Exactly. This is a promotion for the Knights of Columbus Center, one of the facilities in which they sponsored, which were often referred to as KFC Huts. And we would actually have volunteers there staffing it. There were Catholic chaplains there because, as you know, the Knights of Columbus is a Catholic organization, so we were particularly concerned for Catholic members of the service that they had access to a chaplain. But it was open to everyone, and everything was free, and it was a great way to boost the morale of the troops.
We also have one with words from General Pershing himself here.
General Pershing was very strong in his praise for the efforts of the Knights of Columbus. And remember, this was a time when there were a lot of non-governmental agencies, Jeff, that were supporting the war effort. It wasn't all run by the government at that time. So he singled out the Knights of Columbus for praise, indicating that he was very grateful for the work that they did in helping the troops through the wartime efforts.
And this one called See Him Through. So really this was, it's interesting how this was not just a means of reaching out to people to maybe join the service, but really to, like as you've been talking about, support the war effort, buy war bonds and so forth, as sometimes it's been through the ages.
So this poster is, it shows in the foreground what they call a KC, a secretary of one of these KFC huts, and he's pointing to an infantryman, or what they called a doughboy at the time. See him through. Your sponsorship, your monetary help will assist us to serve these fellows while they're overseas fighting for our country. And what's great is, you know, this war effort raised on the order of $30 million, and after the war was over, what was excess was used by the Knights of Columbus to sponsor night schools, to help these returning servicemen integrate into society, get productive work. So the war effort continued even after the war had finished.
Isn't that interesting? Because I wonder, you know, and this is maybe a loaded question about how that culture has changed over the decades in terms of not only supporting a war effort, but also really supporting the servicemen and women as they come back. I believe we have another one called, maybe we don't have the other one. Okay, so these are some of the pictures here that you also have.
Some of the photos show the night schools over here, and then of course here are some of the schools that, some of the centers you see from France, and what a KC secretary would be.
Who's this fellow here?
His name is Frank Large. He was actually from Bristol, Connecticut. He was a KC secretary, or what they call a KFC secretary, or they call them a KC. He managed one of the centers.
Mm-hmm. And oh, this is another center over to our
Exactly,
the viewers
you
far
see.
right, I should say. Very interesting stuff. Now, by the way, how long does the exhibit stay up?
The exhibit doesn't have a defined termination date, but it will be there through at least next fall.
Okay, and the KFC just right here in New Haven.
KFC Museum is at 1 State Street, New Haven. It's open every day, 10 to 5. Admission and parking are free. Love to see you.
Admission and parking free. That's fantastic, and especially given this is amazing artwork that we have here. Are there do you have even a rough idea of how many of these posters are on display?
The exhibit has about 24 posters on display.
Really, and we've only just seen a small smattering of them, I suppose you could say. So I'd be very interested in seeing the whole display, as it were. Peter Sonsky, Knights of Columbus, we really appreciate you coming in this morning.
Thank you, Jeff, and thanks to our servicemen and women.